They said marriage would be sweet, like honey in the morning sun.
But the truth? Sometimes love is heavy. Sometimes it sits between you.
Like a suitcase, full of unspoken words.
Did you know 70% of couples say marriage is harder than they expected?
Everybody dreams of happily ever after.
But only a few see what lies behind the curtain of expectations.
Marriage. The word alone brings images of white gowns, sparkling rings, and Instagram-perfect wedding receptions. In Nigeria, especially, that one day, the traditional ceremony in the village, or the white wedding in town, becomes a carnival, a dreamland sprinkled with also ebi, jollof, praise songs, and pure excitement. But after the music fades and the guests return home, something else begins, real life. And for many couples, it doesn't look like the picture they framed on the wall. Think about it. From youth, we are trained to believe marriage equals automatic bliss. Once you marry, you are settled. Find a good spouse and everything will be alright. A man must provide, a woman must submit. These are the expectations we inherit, unchallenged, untested. Yet, a recent study revealed that 70% of newlyweds feel completely unprepared for the reality of marriage. Why? Because no one told us that marriage is a lifetime of learning, not a resting place after love. Take Nelson and Grace as an example. They dated for 2 years. He bought her small chops and shawarma every week. She sent him sweet morning texts and prayed over his business. They danced at parties, strolled at Bar Beach, and imagined the future through glossy, rose-tinted glasses. But no one told them about the arguments over toothpaste caps and nipper bills. The pressure of a spouse's family asking, when will the children come? The resentment that builds when sacrifices go unnoticed. The silence that settles in when love becomes routine. Expectation is sweet. Reality is a teacher. It was like a customer who tastes rice at Momo Putda one Sunday and thinks, I can cook this better. Then they try it at home, and suddenly realize there's more to that rice than seasoning and oil. Marriage, like that rice, demands patience, skill, and even fire. By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. Proverbs 24 verse 3. Understanding. Not wishes. Not vibes. Understanding. That's where many miss it. So before you walk down that aisle, here's a question to store in your heart. Are you in love with the idea of marriage or the reality of marriage? It was 11:47 p.m. in a small, stuffy 2-bedroom apartment in Egbida, Lagos. The street outside was loud as usual, generators buzzed, children shouted, a distant radio played Kiss Daniel. But inside, the silence between Nelson and Grace was heavy, thicker than the humidity. Grace was sitting at the edge of the bedside, staring at the fridge door left slightly open just outside their room. She could see the light flickering in the kitchen, like it was trying to survive, same way she was. Nelson lay on the other side of the mattress turned to the wall, scrolling endlessly on his phone. They hadn't spoken, really spoken, in days. It all started with little things. Nelson forgetting to call when he'd be late from work. Grace making dinner and eating alone. Nelson pulling away every time she reached out, too exhausted from a job that never paid enough. Grace wanting to talk about her dreams of going back to school, but swallowing those words because this is not the right time, not with the rent due. Expectation, we will share everything. We are best friends. Reality, sometimes love gets quiet. It wasn't that they didn't love each other, they did. But the unspoken was choking them both. That evening, after another silent dinner of Gary and leftover okra soup, it finally happened. You don't talk to me anymore, Grace said quietly as she washed her plate. Nelson didn't respond at first. He just stood there at the kitchen entrance, arms crossed, jaw set. "What do you want me to say?" he replied finally, his voice flat. Grace turned to face him. "Anything. Something. I feel like I'm married to your shadow." He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm tired, Grace. Tired of trying, tired of thinking how to make 20K stretch into a month of food. I'm trying. Isn't that enough?" Her lips trembled. "But you don't even see me anymore. I ask how you are, but you don't ask how I'm doing. I feel like I'm fading in my own home." He paused, blinking, as if the idea of her having needs, too, was new. Two people can share a bed and still feel like strangers in the same room. Yoruba proverb. Nelson walked away instead of answering. Straight to the bedroom. Laid on his back. Pulled the pillow over his head. Grace followed. Sat near his feet, her voice fragile. "This isn't the marriage I prayed for, Nelson." His voice cracked, just a little. "This isn't the marriage I expected, either." And there it was. The crack in the wall. The unspoken heart finally had a voice. Expectation, love will always feel good. Reality, sometimes, love means talking through the pain. Grace wanted romance, not just flowers and sweet names, but understanding, presence. Nelson wanted respect, not just "yes sir," but gratitude, patience. But neither had said it clearly. And sin thrives in silence, not infidelity, but neglect, bitterness, disappointment. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Proverbs 18 verse 21. In that moment of fragile honesty, with a flickering bulb and unpaid bills around them, Nelson did something brave. He sat up and listened. "Tell me what you need," he whispered. "You. Just you," she replied, tears escaping her voice. And in that moment, the silence broke, not because the problems were gone, but because they finally talked. Have you ever had a moment where you couldn't find the words for what you felt in marriage or a relationship? Leave a heart in the comments if you've been there. And don't forget to subscribe, this story is only getting deeper. The next morning, while she ironed Nelson's shirt before work, Grace thought about everything she'd carried into their marriage without even realizing. She remembered the advice her auntie gave her the week before the wedding. A real wife bends like water, no matter the container she fits. At the time, it sounded wise. But now she wondered, can I bend this much without breaking? Grace grew up in a house where her father didn't talk much. Her mother did everything, cooked, cleaned, knelt to greet daddy even when she was sick. She assumed that was normal, that love was about sacrifice, silence, and swallowing it. Nelson, on the other hand, grew up with a loud house full of boys, laughter, and robust debates. He assumed women were naturally emotional, understanding, and resilient. So when they married, their personal expectations collided in quiet ways. Grace thought love meant service. Nelson thought love meant space. They were loving in the only ways they had been taught. Until that stopped working. Let's talk about society, especially in Niger. A man must provide. A woman must endure. Children complete a marriage. Your in-laws come before your comfort. Sound familiar? When Grace didn't take in after the first year, the whisper started. She's barren. Better find her a second wife before it's too late. And when Nelson lost his job briefly, just 3 months into marriage, people asked Grace with raised eyebrows. So how's your husband? Still hunting. In Nigeria, marriage is not between two people, it's between two communities. Expectations from the village, the church, the WhatsApp family group chat, your office colleagues, all of them become invisible guests at your dining table. When a tree stands alone, the wind will break it. Igbo proverb. But what if that tree never chose the forest it was planted in? On their wedding day, the pastor declared, "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." But no one said anything about the unseen stuff that can pull two people apart. Pride, ego, silent resentment, past wounds. Grace prayed often, but her prayers sounded like complaints. Nelson prayed, but only for money. They both believed God had blessed their union, but neither of them really invited God into the arguments, the doubts, the loneliness. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Psalm 127 verse 1. Was it really marriage that was failing, or the idea they had about marriage? Every couple walks into marriage carrying unspoken contracts. Who will apologize first? Who will handle money? Who will sacrifice career? Who owes who? These contracts are never signed, but they can control the atmosphere in a marriage. Grace realized hers when one day she muttered under her breath, "I don't want to be my mother." And Nelson's came out when he sighed while scrolling Instagram at 1 a.m., seeing other men in suits driving Benz while he struggled to afford fuel. Expectations, personal, cultural, spiritual, are like shadows. They go everywhere you go, even into your marriage bed. The week after that late-night confrontation, Grace and Nelson decided to do something different. They wrote down, on 2 separate sheets of paper, what I expected marriage to be. What marriage actually is for me right now. What I need from you to feel seen and loved. What they read from each other was shocking. Nelson had written, "I expected peace. I thought coming home to you would make everything right, but sometimes I feel like a failure when I can't provide. That's why I stay quiet." Grace had written, "I expected partnership. I wanted laughter and prayer, not just survival. Sometimes I miss the man I dated, the one who saw me." That day, for the first time in a long time, they prayed together, not for money, not for a child, but for understanding. It didn't fix everything, but it did something more important. It turned expectations into conversations, assumptions into prayers, love into a choice, not just a feeling. Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Proverbs 27 verse 5. The day everything changed didn't feel like magic. There were no sparks, no violins in the background, no viral quote moment. It was just ordinary. It was Saturday morning. The sun peeked through the curtains, making dust particles dance in the air. Nelson was sitting by the window, shirtless, writing in a small notebook. Grace was in the kitchen, braiding her hair in front of the small mirror by the fridge. And that was the day they finally had the conversation, the one that saved them. "Can we talk, G?" Nelson's voice was soft, almost hesitant. Grace turned, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. It had been weeks since they'd spoken deeply. She nodded and joined him by the window. "I've been thinking," he began, eyes still on his notebook. "I didn't know I was shutting you out. I just didn't want you to see me as less." Her brows furrowed. "Less? Yeah. Less of a man. Less capable. Like I'm failing you because things aren't perfect." Grace didn't respond at first. Her hand simply slid into his. "I never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you involved." And then she did something she hadn't done before. She admitted her own part. "I also didn't say things when I should have. I just expected you to know. I was too afraid to sound needy." There it was, the raw truth. No anger. No blame. Just owning their roles in a quiet storm neither of them asked for, but both of them helped create. We say it before we let it become a war. Not everything they said would be easy, but everything they said would be true. They rearranged their expectations together. They agreed that bad days don't mean a bad marriage. They decided that prayer wouldn't solve what silence kept hidden. They chose to speak love even when it felt heavy, awkward, or confusing. And that became the turning point. Because love is a house, but communication is the door. If you keep it locked, even love can suffocate inside. Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. Proverbs 15 verse 22. Here's the truth most people don't talk about. People don't fall out of love. They fall out of communication. Marriage doesn't collapse because of big sins alone. Sometimes it's the tiny termites of resentment, misunderstandings, unexpressed needs, silent disappointments. It wasn't that Grace no longer loved Nelson, or that Nelson wasn't drawn to Grace anymore. They just stopped talking truth. And when you stop talking, you start assuming. An assumption is the seed of destruction. Change didn't come overnight. There were still arguments, still misunderstandings. But this time, they paused instead of flaring. They shared instead of stewing. They asked questions instead of making conclusions. Nelson began asking, "How are you really doing?" not just, "Are you okay?" Grace began asking, "What can I do to help?" not just, "Why didn't you tell me?" It was in these small acts of honesty that healing began. They started having expectation check-ins every Sunday after service. They'd sit on the corridor, drink cold Fanta, and say, "What do you need from me this week? How can I love you better right now? What's weighing you down?" And the more they talked, the lighter their load became. Let your conversation be always full of grace. Colossians 4 verse 6. Let me ask you something real. When was the last time you truly talked with your partner, not about chores or money, but your heart? And in the comments, if you're bored, type, "I choose truth in love." Let's make honesty a habit, for better, not just for beautiful. By the time Nelson and Grace reached their second anniversary, it wasn't that they now had all the answers. It wasn't that their money troubles had vanished. It wasn't that there was no more tension or tired days. But something had changed. Their marriage was no longer built on fragile fantasies or silent pressure. It was built on awareness, on choice, on two hearts learning how to meet in the middle again and again. Over the years, they learned four simple truths that turned their marriage into something real. 1. Expectation is not the enemy. Unspoken expectation is. Say it, don't store it. Marriages don't crack from storms alone, but from silent droughts of honesty. 2. Communication is love's oxygen. You cannot love someone fully if you're not willing to speak truth and to listen with humility. 3. Society isn't your spouse. In-laws have opinions. Your friends may have jokes. Facebook may have pressure. But the covenant was only ever between three, you, your spouse, and your maker. 4. Marriage is not about perfection, it's about connection. Pictures can be edited. Houses can be decorated. But real marriage is built from the rawness no one sees, and the grace that steps in anyway. Love covers a multitude of sins. 1 Peter 4 verse 8. Not because it turns a blind eye, but because it keeps showing up when life throws shadows. Nelson and Grace stood side by side in their small balcony one evening. The Lagos sunset was soft. Generator hums filled the background. But between them was peace, real peace. No filters. No pretense. Just two imperfect people choosing honesty over assumptions, and grace over pride. Nelson's hand found Grace's. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. She smiled and whispered, "You know, I used to think a perfect marriage was the goal." He chuckled. "What changed?" "I realized a growing marriage is better." He nodded slow, his voice low. "It always was. If this story touched something deep inside you, If you've ever walked into a relationship with silent expectations, unmet needs, or unspoken pain, you're not alone. Drop a comment below. This is what I learned about expectations. Or simply share a part of your journey, you never know who needs to hear it. Sparkles, and if you want to go even deeper, I invite you to watch our related video. Backhand index pointing right, she forgot herself after marriage. Another powerful story on identity, love, and rediscovering who you are in a relationship.